Good.
Hey there, welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host for today, Lisa Dreher. I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Timothy Chou. He came to Silicon Valley over 40 years ago to work for a startup called Tandem Computer. Well, since then, he's done a lot of things. One of the things that he's working on right now, he is chairman of the Alchemist Accelerator, and they focus on enterprise B2B startups. Welcome to the show, Timothy.
Hey, pleased to be here, Lisa. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So maybe you can start by just giving your audience or our audience a little bit of background about yourself and what you're working on today.
Yeah, well, you kicked it off. I did come almost 40 years ago to Silicon Valley to work for one of the original Kleiner Perkins startups, and basically have never left. I've had the good fortune to kind of be in 3 different tracks simultaneously. So I've gotten to work at fairly large companies. I actually served as the president of Oracle On Demand, which is the very beginning of Oracle's cloud computing, multi-billion-dollar cloud computing business these days. I actually started teaching at Stanford University in computer science before you could actually get a bachelor's degree in computer science, which is weird to think about. And then, you know, the blessing of living in the Valley and being involved in startups, some that you've heard of like WebEx and whatnot, has been the other part of it. And obviously, as chairman of the accelerator, I see a lot of new companies coming through. And these days, I pretty much split my time between, I serve on the board of directors of 2 public companies, Blackbaud and Teradata. I started up a class on cloud computing at Stanford now 14 years ago, which I teach once a year. Although this year, because of COVID, I decided to bail and not do class in 2020. We'll restart it in 21. And then I'll say pretty much all my time these days is spent on a project we call the Pediatric Cloud Project. And it's a project to connect all million healthcare machines in all the children's hospitals in the world. And we don't have to spend a lot of time talking, but I mean, it is groundbreaking. We think that by doing this, we can fundamentally transform children's healthcare on a global basis, because today they exist in a hugely disconnected state. Even today, people send MRI scans on CD-ROMs in the mail. I mean, it's primitive.
That's crazy. That's amazing. That sounds like such an exciting initiative. How did you get involved in that?
Well, actually, the story starts in my class. So I have, about 100 kids. About 90 of them are local and 10 are remote. And 4 or 5 years ago, one of the remote students sends a note and says, I'd like to meet the professor. And I went, cool. So we arranged to have breakfast on California Avenue. This guy shows up. I'm looking at him going, he doesn't look like a regular student. Turns out he has an MD, an MPH, an MBA. He's chief of pediatric cardiology at Children's Hospital Orange County.
Oh my God.
He is in town to get a master's degree in bioinformatics, which takes him 3 years to complete a 2-year program, because number one, he has no idea how to code. Number two, he has a real job. He's on call as chief of pediatric cardiology. And number 3, at the age of, I'll say, 52, 53, he decides to adopt an 18-month-old and a 6-month-old, and he's a bachelor.
Oh my gosh. Wow, this guy has endless energy. Holy moly.
His name is Dr. Anthony Chang. He's very involved. Any of your listeners who are interested in the whole AI and medicine area, check him out. He's just released a book. Yeah, I like to tell his story because it says it's never too late for any of us, right? So
no kidding. Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. Well, just talking about your history, clearly you're on the forefront of what's happening in enterprise technology, and I'm kind of interested in knowing, what are some of the key trends that you're seeing happen right now?
Yeah, you know, how does any of us actually know what's really going on? But here's my perception of what's going on. I think we're kind of getting ready to take another big step in enterprise software. And I think we've gone through the phase of, I'll call it enterprise workflow applications, right? And the very first generation of this was basically start at the infrastructure level, meaning Oracle and Microsoft, and I'm not talking about the 1990s. We created, Visual Basic, PL SQL, Oracle databases, and showed up at the enterprise and said, hey, you guys should build an application to help with purchasing. You guys should build an application to track your customers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. By the end of the 90s, a whole group of companies arrived who said, nah, you don't need to do that, right? We're Siebel, please buy our CRM software, or we're PeopleSoft, please buy our HR software. So you don't need to hire all those programmers, but you do still need to have operations people to manage that software. And I'd say that's kind of the second era. And then obviously the third era, which started in the early 2000s, was a group of companies, obviously today, Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, et cetera, said, no, you don't need to hire the programmers, nor do you need to hire the operations people. We will deliver you this software as a service, right?
Right,
so,
right.
Right. Now, meantime, I'll say all of us have heard the story, data's the new oil. We kind of comprehend that data and analytics are important, and lots of examples of this. But I think in the enterprise, we are still stuck in essence, in the first era, meaning, companies, Databricks, Teradata, are all saying, here's cool infrastructure technology, please hire some data engineers and some AI and machine learning people and some DevOps people, and go build some analytics that, make your business better.
Right.
And this, I call it wrong rock analytics, meaning what ends up happening, you build the report that says, why did we sell more toilet paper in Dallas instead of Houston? And then the person that's running the toilet paper group says, well, could you ask whether it's in this zip code or that zip code? And we go around, right? So,
right, sure.
Which keeps everybody busy. But
indeed,
I think we're really ready for the next step, which is what I will call analytic applications. And the example I use on the consumer side of an analytic application. So what is an analytic application? Well, it's an application that serves the needs of a worker. It doesn't serve the needs of a programmer or data engineer or DevOps person. So on the consumer side, I say we have a great example. It's called Google Search.
Yeah.
Google Search is an analytic application. It doesn't try to automate any workflow. Basically gives you answers. And yes, if you peel the cover back, there's a crap load of technology underneath it, DevOps people, smart AI people, et cetera, that make this all possible. But the abstraction is an application. Yeah. And I think that that's where we have to get next in the enterprise, because otherwise we're just going to waste a lot of time and resource building lots of custom applications, the way I would say it right now.
Sure.
And I think across the board, whether you want to think about this in a, I'll call it somewhat horizontal way, meaning every VP of HR has a question called, well, who's the most likely to leave my, the company this month, right? I mean, every VP of HR wants to know that, right? That we don't have to ask whether you want to know it or not.
Yep.
So it could be, that way, which is, I'll call it somewhat horizontal. It could be very vertical. And, since I'm spending time in healthcare, it could be, well, it's an analytic application that tells you based on pediatric echo data, whether or not this kid might have pneumonia or not, which is an analytic application, but sure, very localized. But I think we're sitting at that moment that that's the next big step across the board. is thinking of analytics as applications, not as infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. So do you think that having so many people working remotely is accelerating this?
It's funny. This project we're working on is a network of people that are working on it. I think in the software business, as you know, we've kind of been operating in a distributed mode already. I mean, because we can, right?
Right.
And I think all that's happening is it's accelerating that, right? I said I'm on the board of Blackbaud. There's already been a decision made that the annual user conference, which used to occur in the real world in a place like Nashville, is now going to occur only in the virtual world because, hey, you can have 10 times, 100 times more people attend, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's accelerating stuff that we already knew was kind of true in our business.
Sure.
At a far faster rate because of COVID, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we brought you here today to have you share some lessons with us. So and hey, what better than to have a teacher, right? A professor share lessons, right? So first question is pretty high level, but what are some of the biggest contributors to business success, do you think, just, in having worked with so many early stage companies?
I think if you ask a lot of people, you will hear this statement made over and over again. It's really about leadership, and it's really about people. It doesn't get a lot more complicated than that. Great leadership with great people, you can do great things. Without it, you could have the greatest market identified, the coolest technology. It won't matter, right? And I think, as I know many of your guests have heard, right, venture guys, particularly early venture investing, is about investing in teams more than anything else, because we all know that this is true, that a great team, great leadership, you can accomplish things. And it's not easy. I think that's the other problem. If it was cookie cutter, go to the leadership class, go to the team building class, these things would just pop off the assembly line. But
absolutely.
Right.
So what do you think the key is then to getting that right team or the right leader? Are there lessons in there?
I think one comment I'd make is there can be a belief that leaders fall into some category, right? That's what a leader is. I said I started this class on cloud computing at Stanford now 14 years ago. I'm pretty lazy, so my class is I do the first and last lecture, and you can guess they're pretty much the same. And in between, I have 10 guest lecturers. They're all CEOs of public companies. Early on, we started with people I knew, like, the CEO at WebEx or at Salesforce. But over the years, and in fact, weirdly enough, starting with the founder of Zappos, I realized that I could ask pretty much anybody, and they would, they were never offended that I asked that, would you lecture at Stanford? So we've had a who's who come through there. I mean, actually, we just had the CEO of Zoom last year come in. And one of the things that I want the students, it's interesting, what do I want the students to get out of this class? Yes, there's a lot of material in there about how they see cloud computing or what's the future look like. But what I really wanted them to see was how different all these people are. They don't fall into some mold. You will see the geeky, PhD that ends up being CEO. You'll see the sales guy who really never, did much in computing before become the CEO. And so this pattern of leadership, I don't think it falls into a cookie cutter. I think that's
Yeah.
number one. I
Yeah.
think each individual comes into it on their own. They assemble through counsel, through thought, their way of thinking about leadership. And then in a lot of ways, the companies begin to form around that vision of leadership and how it looks. And I think you can look across the companies in the Valley and outside the Valley, and you will see the company's, let's call it personality, reflected in their leadership. And so they're all not the same. And I think the counsel I would give to your listeners is, it's going to become your way of seeing about what a leader is, what a leader needs to do, how the leader needs to do that. And then through communication and team building, et cetera, exhibiting that right within the personality, or company culture is the other word that's used here, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of dovetailing off of that, what would you say is the most valuable business lesson you've learned over the years, all your years in Silicon Valley?
That half the time you can't be smart enough. I mean, there's hundreds of stories out there. I mean, the one I'll tell you two recently, they're the same, which is, the Google guys got refused by a lot of venture capitalists because everybody went, well, Yahoo's got search. What do we need more search for? And then more recently, Zoom.
Yeah.
I mean, he came into this in a market that was completely, from most people's point of view, saturated.
Yeah.
Right. WebEx was there, GoToMeeting, I mean, Teams, et cetera, et cetera. Why do you need another? Right. And I like to think that, what Eric did was he really proved another way to think about things, which is a lot of us go, oh, I've got to come up with the best new idea, right? An idea that's never been done before.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. And I'd say what Zoom is it's proof that executing an idea well is as important as some really cool new idea.
Yeah.
So I'd say lessons learned, each one of us falls into traps about how we think about things. And lots of times it doesn't end up that way. So I'd say the lesson is to be open-minded still, even if you think maybe you don't know, and continue to ask questions. One of the things I say to my Stanford kids when I start classes, I said, the mark of a great student is not what you know, but the questions you ask. So learn to ask good questions. It's actually an important skill. And I think that all feeds into the lesson is you can't be too sure that you actually know. So keep being curious, keep asking, keep trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that innate curiosity and drive ends up being, at the end of the day, the major driver of success is that behavior generates success.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back in time, knowing what you know now, what would you have told yourself earlier in your career, earlier in getting into the startup world?
I would have bought more real estate.
No doubt, right?
It's a funny story to tell, but I still remember the very first house I bought. I looked at the lowest price house in Palo Alto, Portola Valley, and Los Altos Hills. And the price of those three properties was $180,000.
Oh gosh.
Each one of them was $180,000. And I ended up buying the house in Palo Alto, which had shag carpet and metal kitchen cabinets. I still remember the very first day when I got the keys and walked into it, and I'm looking around going, what the hell have I done?
And now you're wishing you would have bought all three.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Easily. I think the blessing of living in the Valley, and I know a lot of people are talking about leaving the Valley, but I think the blessing's been that if you like tech, and not everybody does, but if you like tech, it's like a candy store. I mean, the people you run into, the people. I sometimes try to explain that Silicon Valley is not. There is a version of Silicon Valley which is called, let's go build an industrial park next to a university. And if we do that, we can replicate Silicon Valley. And I go, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's some parts of the conversation. But I think the real blessing has been that because it's such a high concentration of people, that at the end of the day, you run into people at the grocery store, you're on the soccer field and talking to another parent. And the general ethic of the Valley has been a sharing ethic. I mean, I will, okay, you're a competitor, that's a different thing. But outside of that, it's pretty much, hey, if you ask a question, I'm going to try to help you. And I think that network and that behavior has led to a lot of things that have happened through the years here. And so it's just been, I'd say for a lot of us, just been fun, to be in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
The successes and the failures, by the way, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes you learn more from the failures, right?
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, I want to close our conversation with one more question, which is your one big prediction about the future of enterprise technology. So do you have kind of one big prediction for the next, I don't know, couple of years?
I was invited to write an article for the second book after Future Shock. So it was called Aftershock. And there's a whole bunch of people who are futurists in the book who were asked to write. And I said, I really don't know that I'm a futurist. I can predict things. What I would say is maybe not a prediction, but an opportunity statement, which is enterprise software up until now has really only benefited a couple of industries. Financial services is clearly one of them, retail, and media. I'd say those three, we've seen how it's been used and accelerated things. I think once you take a step away from there, and whether it's healthcare or agriculture, construction, buildings, I mean the entire rest. I've been spending time in the water industry, water, energy. I mean, just keep going. I think that's the great. And I know there's a lot of challenges of those industries, but I think the great opportunity is if at the end of the day, we're not going to all move to Mars, we're going to have to operate the planet in a more precise way. And frankly, the only way to go do that is to use technology. But how does that technology end up in all those areas will be a challenge, but I also think it's the great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for making time to be here today, Timothy. I really appreciate it. As always, I've just enjoyed your insights and having the conversation. So thank you so much for making time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Absolutely. We'll do it again soon.
Okay.